Mm,
Like his house is super modern or whatever, but it's like maybe 1,500 square foot, and it's like super well thought out and all that. So
yeah,
minimalist design.
nice. Hey, Rosie, wet hair don't care.
Seriously. I just hopped out of the shower.
Out of pajamas. That's good.
Out of pajamas. Yeah, I was like, I should get myself ready. And then I thought, for some reason, this call started at 3:30. And so here I am.
Here we are.
Wet hair and all.
Not the
At
invoice
least
for
two
these things,
showers.
Rosie.
That's right. At least she's showered.
I can't say that I have today.
Hmm. I'm starting to get like anxiety about entering life again.
Right? Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for it to open up. I'm like, just getting used to it.
Wondering if my jeans are gonna fit, like
Right.
the athleisure.
I know. Like, what am I going to do when I can't have a cocktail every night? I don't know. Life's going to get dark.
You could.
Or when
Rosie.
my drive to the
You're
gym
really-
is just going into either the living room or the nursery. That's not like just going to an empty room to do my workout.
Right. It's going to be a whole different thing.
Oh man. Got to put shoes on and leave the house.
I know. What? Terrible.
Rex figured out the fancy background.
He really did. He's been using it in every meeting so far. Rex, you're muted.
You're muted. You're only so savvy.
There we go. Their next big thing. They're going to be great.
Favorite part of your background is that when you move away from your desk, it looks like you're going into the pool.
And disappear eventually, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yes. The fun never stops. Fountain Square. How are you all?
Oh, good.
Good. Jess, how's the plant?
I think I saved it. It's not the first time that plant has hit the floor, so I'm hopeful she's strong.
And is Julian still hiding behind the blinds?
I was gonna say, like, have you found Julian? I don't. Pretty tricky, sneaky guy.
Right? Oh my gosh.
Spectacular Facebook post.
That's awesome.
If someone
have
has
you-
access to our Nest cameras, you could make a pretty solid video of I've lost count of how many times the kids have left the front door open, and therefore we have to chase the dog around the block and yell for her and have a box of Cheerios to get her to come back. But today I did it with no shoes on because it happened so fast I didn't have time for shoes. So I'm sure it would be a lot of great laughter and chuckles if you all had access to that. It's pretty great.
I would like to add that Steve Lunsford wins the award for best background, as there's obviously a
not disappoint. I'm
task.
so proud of you.
Yes,
So proud.
tremendous.
The first thing I look for when I join the call now, I'm like, where's Steve? Where is he?
Oh, that's great.
Guys, so many people have their cameras turned on today. Makes me so happy.
Steve, this background is killing me. These people are just checking you out this whole time.
The dude is, the girl is pissed.
That's right. That's right. That's the message.
Yeah.
Steve does a lot of reverse lunges. I don't know if you noticed.
I saw
I love
here where a
I love that I saw
woman-
an article on Facebook that somebody got like reprimanded as this not being professional, and you're being like applauded here. So I'm very proud
culture.
of us.
cultural differences. Good
Great.
job, Rosie. Good job, Michelle.
Rosemary.
I read an instructional the other day on how to upload a video of yourself looking attentive for your conference calls as your background. You just don't want to step in front of it.
That's tremendous.
That is,
Hmm.
yeah. Hey, Steve, could you do a favor and send that to my team? It would really boost my confidence a little bit. Oh, Jenny, I didn't notice that you were here. Sorry. Can I just tell you guys that my team played bingo yesterday during our team meeting Zoom call, watching and listening for things that I say a lot. So like,
So good. That's golden.
it was supposed to be a secret. Unfortunately, one of my team members ruined it and included me on a text message right before the meeting. So I just pretended like I didn't know. And then someone like 45 minutes into the meeting, all of a sudden yells out bingo. It actually was pretty funny.
And it shouldn't have been that big of a struggle because we had words like actually and technically on there. It should have been fast, but it was a struggle.
I think it just means you don't know me as well as you think.
Clearly not.
Jenny, I would love a copy of that whole board. I think most of us would enjoy that.
Yeah. Why aren't we playing Mark Bingo every week and like giving out prizes? I think this should maybe become a thing.
Stephanie had 35 entries and she randomly scrambled them on our individual bingo boards.
So just for the record, not only was my team playing bingo on a call, but our transaction coordinator spent quite a bit of time preparing the bingo sheets. So just so that
Team
everybody-
building, Mark.
Well
Yeah,
done,
so
Steph.
so
I'm
that
so proud
everyone
of you.
knows that. All right, I've got 307, so I'm gonna dive in. Thanks everybody for joining. We're gonna go maybe kind of rapid fire today to try to get to 4 different people before we take a break and then come back to talk about Shift. So I've asked Devin, who's here with us, to kick us off as we've done. I think it's really helpful just to hear from one of our realtors and what their experience has been like. So we now kind of have like a month, which is crazy. We have this a month of time from when the world changed. And so Devin, yeah, if you would just share how business has been for you, how you're feeling and what your experience is, we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I think that I've heard this shared before on previous calls by other folks, that current business is closing generally in the way you would expect it to in non-pandemic times, but finding new business is a little bit more challenging. Trying to educate people on the current market conditions is really challenging. There are a lot of noise out there in the media, specifically on social media. And so trying to overcome some of the objections that come along with is challenging, to kind of be able to share the data, surrounding like what happened in the market week, how many new listings were there compared to pending listings, what does that tell us? Like being able to get to that point in a conversation, particularly in my strategy, which includes a lot of cold calling, is hard. I have to build trust in about 30 seconds over the phone to be able to have a conversation with people about real estate and the data that kind of underpins what's happening in our market. That has been a real challenge. And I'm still able to have those conversations with some, who are willing to listen. And in as much as I'm able to gain people's trust, we have the conversation, we set up a consultation, you know? So I'm still booking new consultations and still signing new listings, but it's not at the rate that I had been a couple of months ago before things started to go haywire. So summary, too long didn't read. It's hard to get new business. Current business is closing as I would ordinarily have. March and April are two biggest months yet as a realtor. But May is looking like it's going to be smaller. I've got 2 pending deals that'll close in May, hopefully. And 4 upcoming listings, but I can't seem to get people to list any sooner than right now. My next listing is in the middle of June. I've got stuff all the way out into the middle and later in the summer as well. So yeah.
Devin, that's really great. What would you say are some of the examples? You referenced the social media narrative that's out there, that isn't really backed up by reality, but is out there very strong. Give us some examples of things that you think consumers are seeing and hearing on social media.
I think it's more based on assumption. They see like that the world is shut down, you know, so I'll have somebody pick up the phone and, you know, the conversation is usually like, hey, I saw your house is no longer on the market. Wanted to see if you were still planning on selling this year. And I get a lot of, well, obviously not. You see what's happening right now, right? You know, like a lot of people who are almost incredulous. It's like, are you like living under a rock? You know, kind of go from like without like making them feel dumb to like kind of retell the story of what's happening, you know, is very challenging. Mm-hmm. And also like we have to recognize there's a saying in sales, or maybe you've heard it, you know, numbers tell, but stories sell, you know? So like trying to like, instead of be like, there were 419 active, you know, newly active listings in our market last week and 819 that pended, you know, like it's very hard to like sell somebody on that when it's just like, you're just reciting numbers that they don't care about. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's really great. I think there is a lot of understandable, well-intended myth out there right now. Like it makes sense. I know why people make those assumptions. But yeah, what we're seeing in reality doesn't line up. So that's great. And I think that's kind of our job right now, right? Is, hey, I know where you're coming from. I know why you would think that or say that. And I think that's great. I had not heard that phrase, Devin, but we were talking about how can you lead with some numbers so that you demonstrate to someone this isn't just my opinion, right? I talk about reality, but then fill in the gaps there with narratives, because most people don't really care about how many listings there are.
Right.
They just want to know, is their house going to sell?
Yeah. And I think in as much as I can push pause on the numbers and ask a thoughtful question, like for instance, if there were a compelling financial reason to list your home now rather than when the coronavirus pandemic is over, would you be interested in hearing more about that? If somebody says no, they would feel sheepish saying no, because I just told them they're basically telling me they're not interested in money, you know? Mm-hmm. So if they are interested in selling their house for the most money possible, usually they will say yes, you know? Right. And that invites me to share some of the numbers, or even better, set up an appointment and say something like, you know, like I have some information that I'd love to share with you. It goes over better if you can look at it while I'm looking at it. Can we set up a Zoom call or an in-person meeting where I can present some of the market trends that are happening that affect your home value and a good timeline and strategy for getting it sold? In as much as I can get that deep into the conversation before somebody hangs up, I can usually convert that into a appointment. I know that this isn't like the strategy for most people on this call, but it's kind of how I'm kind of meeting objections in my own life with people that I'm calling cold, but I'm sure you're meeting similar objections to people in your sphere of influence.
For sure. That's really great. Thank you, Devin. Very
My
helpful.
pleasure.
Okay, I'm going to transition to Jess Martin. We've had a couple questions about this, and good questions. The governor is planning a press conference on Friday, and we are in this, like, what's going to happen with our industry? Why don't we know yet? So I've asked Jess just to comment on a little bit of where we are now and where we think we're headed. So Jess, take it away.
Apparently, Mark thinks I have some like inside scoop to what the governor's going to say on Friday. I do not.
Jess, you didn't get to talk with him earlier? I asked Jess if she would talk with the governor, and apparently she wasn't able to get that done. So
unfortunately not. So I really only have knowledge you guys do, right? We know the governor is going to say something on Friday about moving forward. Our stay-at-home order is supposed to be lifted on Friday. I think looking at the neighboring states, Ohio and Illinois, might give us some insight as to what the governor might be leaning towards. Both of those states are kind of extending their stay in place order, but they are loosening restrictions. So Ohio is opening in phases. Illinois, they've extended theirs, but they are opening their parks back up. Both states are mandating that people in workplaces or people going into public are wearing masks. So I think moving forward, we can expect that we're still going to need to use all of the caution that we have been using over the past several weeks. We're probably not going to start seeing open houses in person here in the coming weeks. I think that's still a bit further out. My board has started doing the virtual open houses. There are some really good resources on their website as to how to do those or how to set those up. If you want, I'm happy to email you the PDF too on how you would set those up. But we know spring is a really big time for open houses in our marketplace. If any of you are interested in doing open houses, I would support you guys in doing that. And I think Emily would also be willing to support and post those on our social media too. So moving forward, I think on Friday we can expect that our business, it's not going to be business as usual. It's going to be much like what we have been doing. We're probably not going to be doing closings in person, all in a room together. We're going to probably see people still working from home. And if you are going out, using masks, using caution, still not being in those face-to-face meetings unless it's absolutely necessary. So I think that's probably what we're looking at. The governor saying on Friday is that we might be loosening some of those restrictions, but we're not going back to our normal.
Thanks, Jess. And we will do our best once we know something to get communication out in terms of like, what does this mean? If that first round of announcements and press conferences, if the timing holds consistent, it's going to be some time from when he makes announcement to when our industry gets its arms around what does that mean for us. So as he starts to loosen the restrictions in the state, which will happen eventually, our industry is going to need some time to figure out, okay, what does that mean for showings? What does that mean for closings? What does that mean for open houses? And I'm just echoing something that Jess said. Our encouragement and direction is, if in doubt, err on the side of caution, right? If in doubt of like, hey, can I start attending closings now, or should I start attending closings now? If you're asking the question, err on the side of caution and continue to do them remotely. Same with showings and open houses. Just try to minimize all of that stuff right now, because if you're, on the latter half of starting to do those things back up, I don't think anyone's going to hold that against you. So you don't need to be in a rush as restrictions are lifted to try to accelerate this to back to normal. So thank you, Jess. Ashley, I've asked Ashley to do some digging. You might remember from now, I think at least 3 weeks ago, I mentioned that the National Association of Realtors had advocated to Congress to let independent contractors, but specifically realtors, be eligible to file for unemployment. So typically, this is not something that independent contractors, this is one of the main differences normally from being an employee of a business to being an independent contractor, is that there is not an unemployment insurance system in place. So NAR advocated to Congress. It did get included, but there was kind of this lack of clarity, like what does that mean and how's that going to work? And NAR actually for a while encouraged realtors not to apply, even though they knew we were eligible. So they've gained some clarity. Ashley's been researching this. So I've asked Ashley to update on what do we know and what do we not know, and who might this be eligible, or who might this be a good fit for. So Ashley, thanks for doing that. Take it away.
Yeah. So yeah, just like Mark said, we want to share more about the pandemic unemployment assistance program as we're learning more on how it affects you guys as self-employed individuals. So yeah, it was passed with the CARES Act in an effort to extend those unemployment benefits. Basically, yeah, application just opened up this past Friday. And of course, still like gray area on a lot of information. I attended a webinar last week that was hosted by IAR and our state's Department of Workforce Development. I reached out to IAR and our state's Department of Workforce Development and NAR to gather a whole bunch of resources to try to get more answers on kind of like who's eligible and what that looks like. So, I mean, to be 100% transparent, there's still a ton of gray area on eligibility, not surprising, but we are left with some, unanswered questions. But what we do know is quite a few things. So I have a list here of kind of what I want to share. So number one is that agents are eligible. So just like Mark said, NAR has put in quite a bit of effort to ensure that. And so I think that's great news for anyone that does need assistance. You can apply for full or partial unemployment compensation benefits for weeks that your work has been impacted due to COVID-19. So the question I think is like what weeks were impacted? What are they basing that off of? So I think the rule here is you're using 4 quarters. You're using the last 4 quarters before last quarter. So what we're looking at is like Q1 through Q4 of 2019. I think what they're going to ask for is probably your 2019 tax return as proof. Some of you may have not actually filed that yet. I think a lot of the stuff I read was like just kind of honesty, like you guys can calculate how many hours you used to work and now how many hours you are working. So same on income. So I think that what I could also provide is maybe like a 2019 like compensation report for you guys, even if you haven't filed your tax return. I know some other people have applied, they've used 2018 tax returns. So I think it just depends on what your year's looking like and what would be most beneficial. You can still be accepting work and be eligible for unemployment compensation. So I think the question here is active, like what is active work? And that is to be determined by our state. That is, you know, I can't find an answer to that, but basically what the state has suggested is there's questions in the application process that will determine that. And so you just need to answer those honestly, and they'll figure it out for you. Another thing I saw that I thought would be helpful is somebody asked a question that said, like, I'm an independent contractor that is in an industry that is deemed essential. Does that mean that I'm ineligible for those benefits? And the answer is no. So you can still be working, let's just say you're working half of what you worked last year, or making half of what you did last year. Due to COVID-19, you're, you know, like working half or making less, and you could be eligible. So I think the key is it due to COVID-19? Have your circumstances changed because of this? Another fact, if you have applied for the PPP loan or the economic injury disaster loan, you can still apply for unemployment benefits. There is no guarantee that you'd be eligible for both, but you can still apply for both. I mean, bottom line, my suggestion would be that if you need assistance, go ahead and apply. There's no penalty for applying and not being eligible. And so the state is even recommending the same, that if you're unsure of your eligibility, just go ahead and apply. I think the application probably takes 30 to 45 minutes, just depending on what information you have gathered together. The first step for Indiana, the first step is to apply for unemployment insurance, which you are not eligible for. You will get denied. That is how they've set up the system. That's fine. So wait on your denial. I think that only takes probably 48 hours. And then they'll send you, like in the online source or whatever, where you apply for the unemployment insurance, then they'll allow you to apply for the PUA application. So I think that's kind of all I have. I'm going to send out an email with some sources, all the links to everything that you guys would need. And if you guys need to reach out for anything, if it's a report that you guys need or just more questions, feel free to.
That's great. Thank you. Just to reiterate something Ashley said there, I think summary is, if you're in need of the funds and you think like you could honestly answer, yes, my income has been negatively impacted by COVID-19, you're essentially risking some time. And the advice that I would give you is don't try to manipulate the application. Just answer honestly and then let the state decide, you know, whether you're eligible. The temperature that I'm getting is that it's going to take a long time. It might be frustratingly slow, but that they are approving applications that would not have previously been approved. So, yeah, Jess, good question. So the examples given were like, hey, your March of 19 income versus your March of 20, or April 19 versus April 20. Ashley, if someone was not in the business a year ago, so they don't have historic data, are they eligible to get this?
Yeah, I haven't found anything that says that there has to be a timeline on you know, your earnings as a self-employed individual.
My guess is that they're going to be more likely to approve someone that had been in the business for longer, because you're going to be able to more convincingly demonstrate that COVID-19 hurt your income. But I don't think that's a must-have. That's my assumption. Good stuff. Thank you, Ashley. You'll get a pretty detailed email from Ashley with quite a bit of information attached to it. Let us know if we can help with that. Transitioning to Rex Fisher. Thanks, Rex, for sharing. Rex has some really exciting news, actually. I think there's a lot to be grateful for, and this is in that category. So, Rex, before you do, could you shed some light on the background that you have there? Is that, I mean, I'm taking a flyer here, but for some reason that looks like Michael Phelps. Is that, what is that? What am I looking at?
This would be the living room of a house we picked up earlier this week, and he has a lot of stuff.
Is that a person or a life-size cutout?
That is a person whose back is literally up against the ceiling. I just thought it was a great illustration of finding value in the current marketplace in so many ways. That is a picture from yesterday as we were climbing through. I'm still a little itchy from it, but great pickup. Real excited. It's great. We, in the month of April, guys, as a brokerage, did something no other brokerage has done. April 2020 over 2019, we increased our sales volume, our transaction volume, by $11 million. Guys, most of the brokerages in the top 10 lost ground. I believe there were only 3 or 4 other, maybe 3 others that made ground. Behind, let's see, we were, right now in MIBOR, we are 7th overall for the month of April. We are 3rd behind Tucker and Century 21 for Indianapolis. We may bump into the number 2 spot. We're off by about $750,000 in volume buying sheets right now. And we are far and away the number 1 brokerage in Center Township, over FC Tucker by over 30%. As a brokerage, we have had a tremendous April, and it is obvious that y'all have continued to put the work in and to figure out how to get this done and close deals that I'm sure looked tenuous at different points this month and in March. I mean, this is tremendously evident of the right work being done out of the right place and staying flexible to what you've been faced with. So I applaud y'all for putting that work in. It is not easy, but it sure has paid off. And the numbers on it, they just don't lie. I mean, I look at, we're not talking small drops here. For April, Tucker's down over $100 million in transaction volume. Sheets is down, let's see, 44 million in transaction volume. Carpenter is down, which is a little expected. Let's see, 15 million in volume. Keller Williams Northeast is one of the ones that was up. They were up pretty well. They were, let's see, oh wait, hang on. I apologize. Those are year-to-date numbers. So Keller Williams or FC Tucker was not down that much for the total year. Where do I have these here for just, yes. Tucker for the month of April off 8 million. Century 21 off 8 million. Carpenter off 20 million. Let's see, Keller Williams off 1 million. Let's see, and then yeah, we went from 18 million to just shy of 29 million. And I won't continue to go up, but guys, great work. It's amazingly encouraging. And I just say, keep doing what you're doing as far as putting the work in every day and staying flexible to the stuff that comes at you. Because it's evident you're doing the right stuff.
Yeah, just to echo with a little bit of narrative, I've spent a lot of time this past month talking with other real estate firms, realtors, and other brokerages, but also lenders, builders, title companies, insurance agents, just people in the industry that aren't necessarily at Platt. And as I've shared with some of them what our April numbers are and what our May numbers look like, it really is something to be grateful for. I mean, number one, just that we have a job that we get to keep working, right? So that's something just in itself. But the production that our company is going to be able to hit for these 2 months, it's incredible. And certainly not glad for the circumstances, but acknowledging what happens in a challenging situation. The more dedicated, the more intelligent, the deeper relationships that a company has, the better they're going to perform in the middle of that challenge. And I think we're seeing that bear itself out. The one thing that Rex shared that sticks out to me the most is that, so I don't know if you caught this, but for the month of April, we will likely be the 3rd highest producing brokerage for the city of Indianapolis, or we could be the 3rd highest producing brokerage. And for a company that has fewer than 90 realtors, it's crazy.
We may be number 2 by the end of tomorrow.
So we are, right. So I misspoke there. We will be 3rd. It's possible that we could be number 2 for the month of April. So that's not all of MIBOR, right? That's the city of Indianapolis. So it's any brokerage that's in our board, but that's in MIBOR for transactions that have an Indianapolis address. I mean, we have quite a few competitors that have 5 times the number of agents that we do. So that is for sure something to be celebrated. Way to go. There's lots of stuff to be frustrated and sad about too, but hey, take the win when you can, and celebrate it. And I think that's something that, hey, put that in your pocket. And the next time somebody asks about, like, what do you have to offer? What's your brokerage? You know, what's the sales pitch? I think it's primarily about you and what you provide, but there's a really good data point to say, hey, in the middle of this, let me share something about what my coworkers are doing in the city. So it's really great. Thanks for sharing that, Rex. Okay, so we went pretty quickly there through Devin's experience, Jess commenting on what we think might happen on Friday, Ashley talking about the unemployment assistance available, some numbers. Comments or questions on any of that stuff? Here in a few, we'll take a break and come back to talk about shift. But before we do that, anybody want to unmute themselves and chime in, ask a question, or make a comment about something they've seen recently, or certainly use the chat too. So I'll give that a second.
I'll add something. I jumped in late, so this might be saying what has already been said. So let me know if that's the case. But and this is just kind of a personal observation of the market, but just with the fact that we've been in the seller's market for a long time, And I've kind of sensed with some different seller clients I was working with hesitation to list or delaying listing, or if nothing else, at least second guessing it in the past 30 days. And it seems like there's been at least enough of that in the market where, since we already have limited inventory and have had that, we've had, I think the statistics were coming in this year, 1 in 4 transactions were going to go into multiple offer. Last year was 1 in 8. 1 in 8. But I feel like that's been a lot higher just because of the low inventory and the fewer sellers listing. So when there's something good on the market, everybody is jumping on it. I don't know if that's been an experience across the board, but it seems like it.
Already low on counterintuitive way, sellers concerned about COVID-19, many of which are legitimate, has put more pressure on inventory. Billy referenced having buyers lose out. He had a buyer submit in a 15 offer situation where they escalated to $50,000 over list price, which is kind of insane, which is evidence of a lack of inventory. So, Joel, I think that's a great word, that we were already low. And maybe the irony is that sellers' hesitation because of the pandemic has put more pressure on inventory, not less. So that's great. Yeah, right. $15,000 or $50,000. They actually, their offer was 20,000 over list as a starting point, with an additional $30,000 escalation up to $50,000 over list price. They won. So I told them congratulations. I have one more kind of brief announcement before we transition, but if anybody else has a comment or question, feel free to jump on the chat there. I want to give a quick shout out and a little bit of a kind of sneak peek at something that Rosie's been working on that we're really excited about. We will have more information coming soon, but Rosie has been hard at work. Can I share the name, Rosie? Are you okay with me sharing the name? Because it's official now. Rosie has been building out a private plat, so password controlled private plat web page that's going to be called Plat Commons. And this will be a place where you'll go to be able to digitally order plat swag, to get resources, to access listing services. We really think this is going to be a great tool to make you more efficient as an agent. Our goal with the website is to remove some of the time and inconvenience hurdles to get things done as an agent, and to kind of connect to the brokerage in some ways. So I know it's vague. I know that's not much detail, but I wanted to just give a little bit of a shout out. Rosie's been working really hard on this, and we're really excited. It looks awesome, and it's going to be a great tool. So in the next couple weeks, you will hear more about that. If you go to platcommons.com right now, it's going to ask you for a password, and none of you have those yet. So you don't get to actually see it yet, but coming soon. So way to go, Rosie. Okay, here's where we're going to take a 5-minute break. For those who are joining for the shift conversation, come back. We'll have Jess kick that off at about 10 till 4. So do whatever you need to do for a few minutes. We'll come back at 4 and jump into that conversation. Thanks, everybody. All right, everybody, back at it, 10 till 4. Our own Jess Martin is going to lead us through a conversation about the next 2 tactics in the book Shift. One note here for those that are going through the book, you may not have gotten to these chapters yet, but for those that have, we've had a few people ask. Late in the book, there's chapters about foreclosure and short sale properties. Just so that you know, we don't anticipate that being super relevant to 2020 or 2021. And so we do think it's a good resource still. Hey, have the experience, read that, learn from it. But when we get to that section of the book, we're going to have one of our agents lead a conversation about something very unrelated to short sales and REO. So go ahead and read that. You don't need to stop, but know that we think that section of the book is one that just doesn't apply as well to 2020 as it did 2010. So Jess, thanks for being willing to lead today. I will let you take it from here.
Yeah. So I'll start with pricing ahead of the market, seller pricing strategies. So this chapter I thought was really helpful. I've been in real estate for 7 years, and it's primarily been a seller's market that entire time. At the beginning of my career, yeah, it wasn't normal for multiple offers. We saw houses sit on the market for 2 to 4 weeks before they sold, but it was still a seller's market. So this chapter about shifting into a buyer's market, which I think for the most part, we are not seeing this right now in Indy. It is helpful to know that looking at the numbers and knowing the numbers is really going to help us watch for if that shift were to occur. And then lead us in some really good conversations with those sellers and how we can add value to the conversation surrounding listing their property. So in this chapter, Keller, he talks a lot about pricing ahead of the market. So that's even more important in a market where the prices are going down. So he says using current data and pricing for today's market, if you're listing tomorrow, you're immediately overpriced. This is something I've never experienced and I hadn't really thought about, but it makes a lot of sense. And then if you're chasing the market down, you're just losing money for your seller. Because by the time you have that conversation about this is where we should have been priced, the market has already gone down. And so having a price drop at that point, he has some really good graphs in here. You're then overpriced again by the time you take that price cut. So I found all of that really helpful. So he was saying empowering sellers by pricing right the first time, which we know this is still true today, even in a seller's market. You have the most power if you're pricing right the first time and selling that property quickly and being competitive. He talks about being a student of your market and knowing the numbers. So doing your homework and being able to provide those numbers to your seller is just so incredibly important in any market, but especially when we're seeing a shift. He did talk about the small period in between a buyer and seller's market, and how that little period typically doesn't last very long. He talks about absorption rate. I thought this was really interesting. I actually use the absorption rate method most of the time. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the absorption rate method or if you've seen it in the past, but I actually ran a CMA and I wanted to share it with you guys in case you haven't seen that or it didn't necessarily make sense when you were reading through it. But we talked about this a little bit on our call earlier and how you can tell how many months of inventory are on the market. And that really helps you have that conversation. Devin was talking about this, like, what happens if you put your house on the market today? What is your competition? Is there competition? And how that can really leave your seller feeling good about listing a property now rather than waiting until later. So let me see if I can share my screen really quickly. I haven't done this yet.
I believe in you, Jess.
What?
I said, I believe in you. You can do it.
All right. Can you see it? Awesome. Okay, so absorption rate. If you're meeting with a client who's planning on selling their property, Keller in the book had referenced pulling everything within a 1 mile radius of the property that you're talking to your seller about, and showing them how many months of inventory were on the market. I think in our marketplace, you can narrow it down even further because we see like huge changes in price ranges within a mile often. So here I really kept it to like properties. I didn't quite go as specific as I would for pulling comps when I'm having that conversation, but I did pick everything within their price range and similar beds and baths. And then I went out, I stayed within the general area where I thought a buyer would be looking if they were looking at that specific house. So here, for this example, we know that our market changed drastically. Well, that's still hard to say, but our lives changed drastically on March 13th, right? So I only went back 3 months instead of the typical 6 months, because I think pulling data for this conversation from 6 months ago is not really going to help your seller. But we want to know how houses are selling today during our stay-at-home order. So you can see here at the bottom chart, we have 7 sold properties right there. Almost every single one of those, every single one of those closed after the stay-at-home order had been put into effect. Pending, we have 5 properties, and then up at the top, there's only 1 active property. So the conversation I would have with my sellers is that if they listed today, their competition, they don't really have much to speak of. And if you're looking at this, we have 3 months of data right here in the sold properties. So on average, every 3 months, we're seeing 7 properties sell right now. And in the past month, we've seen 5 properties penned, meaning we don't even have 30 days of inventory right now to penned. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about absorption rate. How many are selling in roughly 30 days? How many are pending in 30 days? And then do we have that on the market to keep up with that supply? We don't currently in this scenario for this property. So that would indicate that we haven't seen a shift. We're not going towards a buyer's market where this property is located. We're still really in a seller's market. The seller is going to be in a really good spot here. So let me stop sharing my screen. How do I do that, Rosie? Is it fine? Oh, I see it. It's little.
Yeah. There you go.
Did that make sense for everyone, figuring out that absorption rate? You saw that?
Jess, can you say one more time like what that equation is? It's what plus what?
Yeah, so you would essentially look at, so we had 7 properties penned in 3 months. That's a little over to a month that has sold. But we obviously entered our spring market where 5 had pended. So, I mean, we saw a big change there, where it looks like really it could be 5. The demand is for 5 to pend every month or sell every month almost. And we don't have that inventory. So you're really looking for how many have sold in 30 days. It's a little over 2. Do we even have that as inventory? We do not. So that would be a seller's market. Yeah. So that's really helpful when you're having that conversation about what kind of market we're in and how people should be pricing. Now, if that were reversed, like in the book, Keller is talking about a buyer's market. If that were reversed, you would see, 6 properties listed, and that would tell us we have 3 months of inventory on the market right now. So you have to be competitive with your pricing. And then he goes into talking about what are buyers looking for. They're looking for value in a buyer's market. And he talks about pointing out value to your seller, and talking about where those buyers would see value: kitchens, baths, updates, and then having those hard conversations. He talked a lot about hard truths, and that you really add value by telling your client the truth and having those hard conversations and being able to explain why they need to price the way that you are showing them through the data. So he had a lot of good scripts in this chapter, but he was also talking a lot about the chase and chasing that market down and how your seller ultimately loses money. So I thought that was really valuable. On page 156, he has a 7 maxims for pricing in a shifted market. I thought this was like just a really good cheat sheet almost to the entire chapter. He talks about previewing properties, understanding and looking at those properties that have sold, and seeing where the buyers are seeing that value. Because if you're looking at the solds, you'll see where buyers are buying, and you'll be able to guide your sellers in that way. He talks about taking price reductions in advance. This is something I saw in the beginning of my career, and I had actually used a few times. I think it's smart. So basically putting in your listing contract that if the property doesn't sell by X date, you will take a price reduction too. And that way you're already having those hard conversations with the seller, and they understand like what happens if you hit the market and you're overpriced, what the next steps are. And you don't have to keep going back to them and asking for these price reductions.
Jess?
Yeah.
What, can you like walk us through like a mock conversation of what that would look like? Like if you're in a listing presentation, you want to talk price reductions, like how do you broach that subject? Like, are you offering them like, okay, like my idea is to lower it by 10 grand or whatever? Like, how does that go down?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were doing this, and I have done it. So basically the conversation is usually, here's the data. Here's where I'm suggesting your price be listed if you do X, Y, and Z. Let's say they aren't doing all of those things and they are pushing the top of where you would suggest listing the property. So a lot of times those conversations, and Keller talks a lot about taking overpriced listings and how, every agent has to kind of decide what it is their tactic is and if they're okay with that. But when I've taken what I thought was an overpriced listing and I had to have this conversation, I'm saying, okay, we will test the market. We'll go ahead and list at the price that you really want to list your home at. But understand the market tells us, and I think right now the data is showing like if you have more than 8 showings and you're on the market for more than 2 weeks, you're likely overpriced. But you have to look at that data for that specific house. At that point, we're going to drop your price. And we're going to go with the price that maybe I've suggested, or you don't even have to say that. You can say, we're going to price where the market says we should be priced at that point. So we're going to list at X price, and then have that price drop 2 weeks later. Are you okay with that? And you can put that in the listing contract. And then you don't have to do that amendment to the listing contract to have that price change. So it saves everyone just a little bit of time and effort. So was there anything else in that chapter that anyone wanted to chime in or they thought was a really good takeaway? Feel free to put it in the chat.
I'm just curious when, so like right now we have a seller's market and you have a buyer and you're out looking at properties and you see some of the prices or days on market, like how do you approach that with a buyer as you're showing them properties?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I often approach buyers just like I would a seller. Let's pull comps. Let's do our homework and research. If you've been out there looking in the market and they've seen a number of homes, they have a good feeling for what homes are selling for, and for if they see value in that home. But pull comps, show them what the data is telling you, that where the house should be priced. Also have the conversation about where our market is trending. Right now, we know prices are still trending up. I just checked from last week's conversation that Mark guided us through, and it's still tracking the same. Our April numbers haven't come out yet, so we're not seeing any changes. Prices are still tracking up. So that is a conversation you can have with your buyers saying, you know, we haven't seen a shift. We haven't seen the market change. Will it happen next month? Your guess is as good as mine, but that's not what we're expecting necessarily in our marketplace. Let's see here. Anything else on tactic 7? Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is he talks a lot about advising your clients and acting as an advisor. I love that. I think it's something we should always do as agents. We're not telling them what to do. We're just showing them and advising them. And in the next chapter, he talks a lot about like motivation, but not everyone's motivation is money. So we can have the discussion around price, but sometimes the motivation is, I need to move quickly. And he does touch on that quite a bit in this chapter, like I need to move quickly. So then you can have that conversation. Where do we need to price quickly, and what types of things can you do so that the buyer is seeing value? So helping them and guiding them and leading them through all of those scenarios. And if you price where the market is today, this is what we're likely to see. If we price in a buyer's market below the market, you're likely to sell faster. So I thought that was really good to talk about motivation and just advising them. So we'll move on to tactic 8, which is stand out from the competition, seller staging and strategies. So I love this chapter. Staging, I would say, is something I've always loved, but never been good at, like selling staging necessarily. And he has some here that I just loved. So he goes into, again, how to advise your seller about home staging and walking them through, explaining that buyer's have all seen this. A buyer walks into a house and it has a somewhat dated kitchen where really it's just maybe the backsplash is from the 80s. And a buyer immediately is like, all this must be ripped out. It has to go. The whole kitchen needs a renovation. It's going to cost me 30 grand. When really, if that seller were to just tear out that backsplash, the kitchen looks fresh and clean. And so he's talking about advising our clients through what they can do to update a home. I just had this with an expired listing where there was this beautiful little kitchen nook with a table that was built in, and the table had like a cityscape of Italy on it that was black and white, and it looked really dated, and it was terrible. The listing, when expired, they had like one showing the whole time it was on the market. I went in, we walked through what they could do, and at this point the sellers were just over it. They just wanted to sell this house. We had a painter come in, refresh some of the paint. One of the big things I did was have him pull off that cityscape off the top of that kitchen nook that looked so permanent, and it wasn't, and paint it. And it sold in like 3 days. Like, it's just incredible that something so small, where people probably before that saw like the whole kitchen felt small and dated, just because that's where your eyes went when you walked into a home. So we can add a lot of value just by advising clients and walking them through these things. And then going a step further, and he talks about this, and lining up those people to do that work. I always love the thought of like treating your business like a concierge business. So calling up the contractors, having them quote it, and sending the quotes to your clients, and even walking them through this quote is more than what you want to spend. I understand, but I think if we just pull these 3 things out of here, you'll see a huge change. And so I think prepping the home for sale is such a valuable asset that he really broke out as to stage. The lack of curb appeal and focus only on the inside. That is so true. Dave, I love that. And he touched on that in the book. So curb appeal, he broke out, what did he call it? The 2P, 3 Ps and 2F formula, which, let me see if I can, I'm right there. What did he call it? Oh, here it is. The 3P and the 2F formula. Plantings, paint, pictures. So plantings, he was talking about curb appeal. Paint, touching up the paint inside, and pictures. I think that was talking about the pictures of the listing. And then the 2 Fs were fixtures and furnishings. So those larger items that are typically pretty easy to minimize. So the point about the exterior. So he also talks about comparing the competition, which I think all of this when you lay out the competition, just like in the last chapter where we were looking at the spreadsheet and showing them what their competition would be today when they listed, it's just as important to lay out that competition and share pictures. So pull up those listings, print the listings, whatever you need to do for your client, and point out, I like to ask, which